In the summer of 1942, Adolf Hitler pushed his armies deep into the Soviet Union, chasing oil, glory, and a city that carried Stalin's name. By early 1943, one of Germany's best armies was encircled, starving, and doomed in the ruins of Stalingrad. Today, in about 15 minutes, we'll walk through how the Battle of Stalingrad unfolded, why it became a turning point of the Second World War, and how decisions made hundreds of kilometers away sealed the fate of hundreds of thousands of men. This is 15-minute history. Let's begin. To understand Stalingrad, we have to rewind. In June 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union. 3 army groups advanced along a huge front, aiming to destroy the Red Army, capture key cities including Leningrad and Moscow, and knock the USSR out of the war in a single campaign. They got close, but not close enough. By the winter of 1941-42, the Germans had reached the outskirts of Moscow but failed to take the city. The Soviet counteroffensive pushed them back and shattered the illusion of an easy victory. As spring 1942 approached, Germany faced a brutal reality. The Red Army was damaged but not destroyed. German resources were strained. A two-front war against Britain and now the Soviet Union was dragging on. Hitler needed a new plan for 1942. Instead of another frontal assault on Moscow, he turned south. Why? Because in his mind, oil was the key. If Germany could capture the oil fields in the Caucasus and cut off Soviet resources, the USSR might finally collapse. This shift in focus sets the stage for Stalingrad. The German 1942 summer offensive was called Operation Blue. The idea was to push into southern Russia, seize the Caucasus oil fields around Baku, and secure the lower Volga River. In this plan, Stalingrad, a major industrial city on the Volga, was initially important mainly as a transportation hub, a production center, and a potential flank guard for the drive south. But the city's symbolic value quickly escalated. It bore the name of Joseph Stalin. Capturing it would be a propaganda triumph. Losing it would be a humiliation for the Soviet leader. As German forces advanced in the summer of 1942, Hitler's objectives shifted. What had been one goal among many increasingly became the goal: take Stalingrad at any cost. This obsession would lead to disastrous overreach. On the German side, the main formation was the Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, supported by elements of the 4th Panzer Army. They were part of Army Group South, which had been split into 2 separate army groups, one thrusting toward the Caucasus, the other toward Stalingrad. On the Soviet side, the defense of the city fell to the Stalingrad Front, later reorganized into Don Front and Stalingrad Front. Key Soviet commanders included General Vasily Chuikov, who would lead the 62nd Army in the city itself, as well as higher-level commanders like Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky, who helped plan the larger counteroffensive. Surrounding these names were hundreds of thousands of soldiers from Germany, the Soviet Union, and also from Germany's Axis allies, Romania, Italy, and Hungary, who would play a critical role on the flanks. In the summer of 1942, German forces surged across the steppe toward the Volga. Luftwaffe bombers pounded Soviet positions, and mobile units pushed rapidly eastward. By August, the Germans reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. At this point, the Soviets faced a hard choice: abandon the city and fall back, or stand and fight in an increasingly desperate battle. Stalin chose to fight. He allegedly ordered, "Not a step back." The city became a symbol of Soviet resistance, as much as it was a strategic objective. Throughout late August, the Luftwaffe heavily bombed Stalingrad, turning large parts of the city into rubble. Ironically, this destruction favored the defenders. Rubble made it harder for tanks and easier for infantry ambushes. Streets became mazes of ruins, cellars, and improvised strongpoints. As German infantry advanced into the city, they found not an easy conquest, but a nightmare of close-quarters urban warfare. From September into the autumn of 1942, the Battle of Stalingrad turned into a grinding struggle for every block, every factory, every building. The Soviets organized the defense using the 62nd Army, commanded by General Vasily Chuikov. Chuikov adopted tactics that took away German advantages. Hugging tactics. Soviet troops tried to fight as close to German lines as possible, sometimes only tens of meters away, so that German artillery and air power couldn't be used without hitting their own men. Strongpoints. Individual buildings became fortresses. Names like Pavlov's house apartment block became legendary for holding out against repeated assaults. Night attacks and infiltration. Soviet units used the ruins to slip behind German lines, complicating assaults and stretching German nerves to the breaking point. On the German side, street fighting was brutal and exhausting. Elite units, including some of the best infantry divisions, were thrown into the battle. Despite heavy losses, the Germans pushed the Soviets back toward the Volga. By October, the Soviets held just a thin strip of land along the river. In some places, the front line was only a few hundred meters from the water. But the Soviets had two enormous advantages: supply across the Volga, even under heavy fire. Boats ferried men and supplies into the shattered city. And strategic patience. The Soviet High Command was preparing something much larger than simply holding a few ruins. While the Germans focused on crushing the last pockets in Stalingrad, Soviet planners looked at the bigger map, especially the German flanks. As the 6th Army and parts of the 4th Panzer Army concentrated inside the city, their extended flanks to the north and south were held not by German troops, but by Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian units. These Axis allies were often less well-equipped, short on anti-tank weapons, and stretched thin across long fronts. The Soviets noticed. They planned a massive counter-offensive called Operation Uranus, aimed not at the city center, but at these weaker flanks. On the 19th of November 1942, the northern pincer struck Romanian forces north of Stalingrad. The next day, the southern pincer hit Romanian units to the south. Within days, Soviet armored and mechanized units punched through these lines and drove toward the rear of the 6th Army. On the 23rd of November 1942, the two Soviet spearheads met near the town of Kalach, west of Stalingrad. The result: the 6th Army and other Axis units in and around Stalingrad were encircled. Roughly 250,000 men, Germans and their allies, found themselves trapped in what the Germans called the Kessel, or cauldron. This was the disaster that had been building for months. At this point, German commanders on the ground urged a breakout. General Paulus and others believed their only hope was to fight their way west before the encirclement hardened. But Hitler refused. He ordered the 6th Army to stand fast and hold its positions. Hitler believed the Luftwaffe could supply the pocket by air, flying in enough food, ammunition and fuel to keep the army fighting until a relief attack broke through. In reality, this was nearly impossible. Weather conditions were harsh. Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft fire took a heavy toll. Airfields inside the pocket were under constant threat. The amount delivered by air never came close to what the Sixth Army needed. Meanwhile, a German relief attempt, Operation Winter Storm, led by Field Marshal Manstein, pushed from the south in December 1942, but it failed to reach the encircled troops. Inside the pocket, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Supplies ran out. Horses were eaten. Wounded soldiers froze or starved. The once proud Sixth Army was being destroyed without the mobility or firepower to change its fate. By January 1943, the situation was hopeless. Soviet forces tightened the ring and launched Operation Ring, a series of attacks to reduce the pocket sector by sector. German positions were isolated, compressed, and overwhelmed. Command and control began to break down. Units collapsed into small groups, fighting simply to survive. On the 31st of January 1943, General Paulus, recently promoted to Field Marshal, partly because no German Field Marshal had ever surrendered, was captured by Soviet forces after surrendering in the southern pocket. 2 days later, on the 2nd of February 1943, the last remnants of the Sixth Army in the northern sector surrendered. Of the roughly 250,000 Axis troops surrounded at Stalingrad, only a fraction ever returned from captivity after the war. Stalingrad was not the largest battle of the Eastern Front in terms of overall casualties or scale, but it was a psychological and strategic turning point. Strategically, Germany lost an entire field army. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. From this point onward, the initiative increasingly shifted to the Red Army. Psychologically, for the Soviets, Stalingrad became a symbol of resilience and eventual victory. For Germany and its allies, it was a shock, a public, undeniable catastrophe. Stalingrad also exposed key flaws in German strategy: overextension across vast distances, underestimation of Soviet reserves and industrial capacity, reliance on weaker allies to hold crucial flanks, and a leader, Hitler, who refused to adapt to reality on the ground. From the rubble of Stalingrad, the long retreat of German forces on the Eastern Front had truly begun. You've just seen the Battle of Stalingrad in about 15 minutes. In future episodes, we'll look at other turning points, from the Eastern Front to the beaches of Dunkirk, and from Roman civil wars to the fall of empires. If you found this breakdown helpful, subscribe to 15-Minute History for more 15-minute deep dives into World War II and Roman history. Comment below, which battle or political crisis should we cover next? And share this video with someone you know who loves history. From legions to panzer divisions, this is 15-Minute History. Thanks for watching.